Hello, this is my first attempt at a video for everybody. So today all I'm going to be doing is reading the gospel and reading my sermon. Hopefully I'll be able to do more as I go along, but this is a first start. So without further ado, I'll read our gospel. The gospel today is taken from St. John chapter 9. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with his saliva. He spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" I said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who has formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him now how he had received his sight. He said to him, "He put mud on my eyes. Then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is now that he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself." His parents said that because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of an age, ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered him, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. When we know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to the one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I have come into the world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sinned. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." The Gospel of our Lord. Let us pray. O Lord, let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable unto you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I don't know about you, but my week has been strained. With the kids out of school and the church program shut down, life has been turned upside down. Old routines have been put on hold indefinitely, and there are no answers, no timelines, just a lot of patience and readjustments and more patience. It is hard not to be able to see what the next step will be like when we are so used to knowing how each day will play out, more or less, and we can prepare for it. In essence, we have been blinded, and we don't like the sensation of not being able to see where we are going. Enter in all of those who choose to try and tell us what the next step will be. We are so frightened by the notion of being blind that we find some way of seeing what lies ahead, even if what we are seeing is based on nothing but guesses and theories. I really don't like venturing into the world of Twitter and social media right now. It is a scary world, filled with theories and conspiracies that would curl my hair if I actually had any hair to curl. Pictures of empty food shelves drive people further toward panic. Yet we still flock to these sites and we still let panic grab a hold of us. Why? Because apparently it is better to believe and see the worst thing around us than it is than to sit in our blindness and just be patient. It is better to see the worst than not see it all. The blind man in our gospel reading today knew all about what it was like not to see. He was born blind and life was always dark to him. As difficult as life can be for people who are blind in our own day and age, how much worse would it have been for someone in ancient Israel? No support networks except through family, no prospects, just a life of darkness and poverty and isolation. Then along comes Jesus and his disciples, upon seeing the man, ask, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" If you think about that question, it makes little sense. If the man was born blind, how could he ever been at fault for sin that he was not yet alive to commit? But the disciples are looking for answers to a question I'm sure they have asked many times. Why does something like this happen? They don't know, so they fell back on old principles that they knew from the religious teachings of their time. Jesus' response is one that must have rather shocked them. Jesus tells them that sin had nothing to do with this. Neither he nor his parents did anything to cause this to happen to this man. And to prove this, he leans down, makes mud with his spit, places it on the man's eyes, and behold, the man can see again. Of course, this upends everything that the disciples believed, and not only the disciples, also the man's neighbors, the Pharisees, and his own parents. They couldn't see how this could happen. It defied logic. It made no sense. Sin is punished. Thus, sin must have played a part in this man's blindness. Yet Jesus shows that, in fact, that is not the case. Thus, many of them did the only thing they could think of doing. They labeled Jesus himself as somehow in the wrong, as having defied the will of God. No one had an answer for what had taken place, so they created answers. They wanted to ignore what they had seen. They preferred to stay in their own blindness. The irony of this story of sight being restored is that it has little to do with the man who was born blind. That seems to be the focal point of the story, but the sight that was being restored was actually the sight of all those who witnessed the event, or the man afterwards who suddenly could see when sight had been denied him all his life. They were blind to what God had done to the man and what it meant. They were blind to what God was up to in their midst and to the nature of God's own self. When they did get to see a measure of that truth, a truth that should have been life-giving and inspiring, they chose to live in their own darkened beliefs and not see what Jesus was offering to them. Perhaps they found that choice easier or less scary, but the truth was too much. Their own version of the truth suited them better. This is still true today. We are constantly offered a new sense of truth, a truth that can set us free and help us see God's love in us and for us, and we refuse to acknowledge it. Because it is scary to let go of what we thought in favor of something new. It is scary to be able to see with eyes open to God. It is easier to see with eyes closed by our own myopic beliefs. That seems rather heavy, perhaps. What are you trying to say, Pastor Matt? Well, here's an example of what I mean. Racism has been a huge issue in the world for a long, long time. It still is. We judge people by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character, as Martin Luther King Jr. so eloquently phrased it. We hold on to stereotypical beliefs about people and cultural groups. Many of these thoughts are so ingrained, they are hard to shake. That is until we learn about a person and a particular cultural group. Then we see that all the old prejudices are just hearsay and untrue. I often heard growing up that Mexicans were lazy. I didn't believe it, but I also had no experience with someone who was Mexican. When I lived in Mexico in 2000, I learned that that was the farthest thing from the truth. I worked alongside many people from our host community for 3 months, and they worked very hard during that time. Mexicans were not lazy. I am sure there are Mexican individuals who are lazy, just as there are lazy Canadians. And there were a lot of sore Canadian muscles until I could keep up with them as we worked together. God calls us to see through eyes of grace and love, not prejudice, hate, and darkness. Racism, bigotry, sexism, and any ism that keeps us apart from the other stands firmly against the gospel and love of God. The people of Jesus' day wanted sin to be the reason that the man was born blind, but it was their eyes that were shut. They couldn't see that God's love was just as present in the man's life as it was in their own. His blindness was just something that occurred. It was not a mark of God's displeasure, but their eyes were closed to that fact. They couldn't see God's love. That is what we are blinded to even now. We can't see the way forward through our current situation, but we will eventually. Our blindness goes far deeper than just not knowing what tomorrow or next week or next month will bring, however. Our blindness is blindness that refuses to see that God is still at work, even in spite of the scary times we live in. We too often prefer to see the darkness, the fear, the terror of the situations, and think that only doom can have the last word. And we forget that God is active. We can't see it because we are blind to the hope that is still all around us. Don't believe me? Look at all the doctors, nurses, and other medical staff that continue to put their own health on the line for the sake of others, not just now, but every day of their professional career. Look at how communities are pulling together and looking after each other, even if it has to be over the phone or text. God is still there in our midst, helping us hold on to the hope and love that has always been our blessed assurance, our rock, and our salvation. Our blindness keeps us from seeing hope and keeps us from seeing all the ways God's love is still active in our lives. But our eyes are opened, and when they are, they can see life and love and God's precious hope. What is the future as we go forward? I have no idea. How long will all of this last? No clue. When will we worship together again as a community of believers? Who can say? Well, perhaps who can say, if by who you mean World Health Organization. Sorry, stupid joke. But let our eyes be open, always open, for God working in our midst. God has not left us. The light still shines. And as our eyes are opened again and again by God, may we see the ways we can live differently. As people of hope, now and throughout our days. We who have dwelled in darkness, the darkness of fear or prejudice or hate or anger, have seen a great light. May our eyes and heart of faith be always open to see God with us in all things. Amen.